Hi everyone. Thanks for joining another episode of Code and Counsel. Today I have my good friend and fellow founder Hari. Hari Balaji has a very illustrious career and has been involved very deeply in AI since a long time. So first of all, welcome Hari to the podcast.
Thanks, Chetan. Absolute pleasure to be here and to be able to speak to your audience.
And just to add, Hari's got a stellar academic career to both with the stellar AI credentials as well. Hari's had a very illustrious career on the addition to his stellar academics, and he's a graduate of both IIM Ahmedabad as well as IIT Madras. He's also had a very stellar quant career, and he started, correct me if I'm wrong, Hari, but you started with Goldman Sachs and all the way then led to creating being the co-founder of Egregore Labs. And that's his I'm tracing 2 decades of his career in a couple of sentences. But he's had a very storied background in this, and he's probably one of the people who is very well qualified to talk of all the latest things in AI and how things are shaping up. So welcome once again, Hari, and thank you for your time.
Thank you
for this.
Thank you for that very warm introduction. I hope I live up to that reputation today.
Not at all, Hari. But just to start off, it's very interesting, right? I mean, you were at Goldman Sachs, you were a quantitative strategist there, and then you ended up sort of like co-founding Egregore Labs. I mean, what inspired the shift? And can you just talk about a little bit of your journey?
Yeah, sure. So, so I started my career at in a very quantitative role, right? And that sort of went on for about a decade. And so I think in many ways, finance as a field was a bit accidental for me in the sense that I didn't grow up wanting to be in the financial services industry. I went naturally with the flow, and I landed up at IIM Ahmedabad, and the placement process took me into the financial services industry, and particularly I would like to specify here that it's largely the secondary capital markets, right? So spending a lot of time working with derivatives, and fundamentally, I'm a nerdy guy, and like to tinker around with things and work with numbers and so on, as are you, Chetan. And so I think that sort of naturally made it a comfortable place to start my career, and things took off from there, right? And obviously, once a huge respect for Goldman, amazing people you get to work with, and obviously global platform, and very interesting problems that you get to solve on a day-to-day basis. And that sort of kept me there for a decade almost, right? And I think that was a very interesting phase of my career. And sometime around the time when I was 35, I wanted to move back to India. To a large extent, that was driven also by personal reasons, and wanting to be close to family, and my wife's burgeoning career in India, and so on. And I also was very fortunate at that time to meet my co-founder. So around 2015 is when I met him, and he was on to some pretty interesting ideas at that point. So being a quant, I had spent a lot of time working with numbers in the beginning, but then subsequently, uh, beyond just building complex financial models and such, went on to also do a lot of selling of these ideas, right? And that extended beyond just the idea of I would say building numerically interesting products, but also things that were problem solved to align with prevailing regulatory, accounting, tax, legal, and other frameworks, right? And so essentially, sort of trying to build something that is not just maximizing revenue for a given risk, but also is from a regulations perspective aligning with many of these constraints and rules, right? So it was a fairly interesting thing to work on. But around 2015, 2016, I think one of the earliest problems that I sort of encountered, which took me in the direction of what was then NLP, which will now get subsumed under AI, was the idea that let's say if someone, let's say the top research person at Goldman releases a new research report, right? Now this is sort of let's say extremely famous and well regarded guy. Everyone wants to know what he is going to talk about, and he releases a new report, right? Now, how do we sort of understand what the reaction of our client base is to this report, right? So I think that is sort of one of the let's say toy problems that I spend a lot of time thinking about, because the traditional way of doing this would be to disseminate that report and then to have people at different parts of the world who are sort of uh, sending that out to their clients, then reach out, ask them what did you think about it, or like organically get some feedback, collate that, summarize that, and then it sort of comes back 10 levels till, let's say, the head of research after a week or 2 weeks will get some kind of a summary, right?
Mhm.
With some talking points. And the idea was that, is there a way to sort of organically be able to get this information by observing conversations, right? By sort of looking at mail interactions, looking at let's say chat interactions, identifying when this particular report was shared and when it is being talked about as a topic, and being able to bring all of that back together in one place, right? Obviously this is a huge data security and privacy nightmare, right? So it is something that would probably never actually happen. But as a part of thinking about this problem, spend quite a bit of time teaching myself various aspects of NLP, and at that time it was all about parts of speech tagging and things like that, right? So very early Stanford NLP library, very and I think it was just sort of the what was making it interesting was that the idea of this whole CBOW skip gram, right? Like a bag of words, and sort of word to vec and vectorization, and sort of
Mhm.
those sort of early ideas were just sort of coming about when I was starting to look at the space. So around then I sort of met my co-founder, and he was in the business of market data, right? So the large number of financial services players in various capacities buy data, right? It could be as simple as, let's say, what is the price of a stock, but also let's say market depth, or positioning, or let's say it could be dividend data, corporate data, like variety of data gets sold, and most of that data is quantitative. And this gentleman was very interested at that time in exploring whether qualitative data feeds could similarly be created and sold, right? And so it seemed like a very interesting problem to work on. We spent quite a bit of time thinking about whether that is something that we want to do something about, right? So that's kind of where sort of the journey itself started, right? And yeah, I mean, I think the sort of where it took us was in a completely different direction, but essentially, yeah. So it is sort of in some ways sort of let's say an accidental start, where I was looking to move back and work on and do something a bit different. And this was an interesting and exciting space. And I had some exposure to it, and since I was anyway moving back to India and I wanted some kind of a reset, it felt like a good idea to sort of try this out and see if we can do something here, right? Now, obviously, like I think in the beginning, the conversation was that, hey, I'll work on this for a couple of months and then we'll see where it goes. But very quickly, we got excited about the idea. I think the most important thing is that at that time, the co-founder relationship really clicked, and it made sense to sort of try and build a company around it. So that's kind of how got started here. So that's sort of the long-winded answer of how the switch from being a quantitative strategist to becoming a founder. Yeah.
No, I think that's very interesting. As an aside, back in 2014, one of the things, and we've had similar paths in the sense that I used to, during the credit crisis, I used to work pretty closely back in London, especially on offshore, offshore funds, and some of the and during the crisis, a lot of these went down as well, and there was a fair amount of liquidity crunch, if you remember at that time, correct?
Right.
And one of the things that I happened to work on was something called private investor back in 2014. I got together, a small team and actually built a secondary market,
Right. Right. We
for
spoke
some of
about
these
this.
things.
Right.
Yes, and we ended up sort of like even getting some regulatory approvals for some of these things as well. And but the truth of the matter was it was too early for the market
Right.
at that time. It still is, and it's taken a very different turn now. Correct? It's become a market for unlisted securities. But if
Right.
you look at it from a global perspective, correct, I think it is just building out building out an entire engine at that time, if I remember, and we said getting the valuation of a company, correct. This is something. How do you arrive at a valuation of an unlisted security? All
Right.
these things were like fairly new then. The computing power was nowhere to what is available right now, and some of the algorithms were literally handcrafted, correct? So for some of these things, but that's on a side. But very interesting. I happened to work with a bunch of fonts at that time as well,
Right.
all friends. But it's quite an interesting field even today. A lot of people did try and attempt it in India after that, but without the once again the domain knowledge plays a very important role for all of these things as well. So I think that's one thing. But back on this, so you started Egregore Labs, and you basically started looking at a data-driven approach to finance, correct? And it comes with its own set of challenges, especially, correct? So, and and some of the libraries that we spoke about and things like that have undergone a sea change as well. And when Transformers came out, from Google, that changed quite a few things. Some of the Python libraries available today, just which all of us take for granted, are were actually getting built at that time, correct? And how did you solve some of these technical challenges when it came to sort of finance? And I'll talk a little later about the LLM challenges when it comes to finance as well, correct? And but how did you initially sort of you wanted to take a data driven approach? How did you
Yeah.
solve some of the engineering challenges that came with it?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think about the right way to answer that question. So I'll let me sort of at a very high level talk about, some of the issues that we encountered as we started this, right? So, first of all, I think the core challenge, and I have to be very careful not to over-index on my experience too much here, and sort of try to keep it a bit generic, right? And so I think the core problem in this entire space, which we had when I started, as well as I think to some extent we have today, is that this is really a solution looking for a problem in some ways, right? So, if I have to think back to sort of my start of this journey, right? I think what was really, I didn't sort of get into this saying that, hey, I want to make money, or I'm very excited about this problem and I want to solve it, right? Though at that time I just got in saying that, okay, this is very exciting, very interesting. I have not encountered something like this before. It feels like the future, and I have to be part of it, and I have to understand and learn. And I want to basically, it was like a sort of a passion for it, right? So I think that's sort of how we got in, right? So in many ways, I think the core challenge almost becomes, and I think this is true today as well, is that you start you basically sort of take a solution, and then you sort of try to see how it can be fit into solving some problems that work for you, right? And in our case, the chosen area which we understood was really financial services, right? And the idea was that sort of how do we sort of then resolve this problem, and what problems do we pick to solve here, right? So I think we picked the one which we understood the best at that starting point, which was that okay, there are people buying market data. They're going to use that data to, let's say, trade in the market or make financial purchase decisions, buy and sell stocks or derivatives or whatever. Now, can we add something based on all the other textual data, all the other information, news, etc., etc.? Can we sort of come back and give people signals which tell them what to do in the market, or which they can add to their repository of existing data tools in order to make a decision, right? So that's sort of the problem we set up for ourselves, right? Now, again, as it's true now, it was true back then. The rate of evolution of technology has been, or like what is available in terms of tools, has just massively exploded, right? So there's traditional approaches, which is probably what you've picked up in college or what you've picked up, in the past, and then then there is basically things which you find in textbooks, right? So back then, you would, if you sort of wanted to do a course, it would take you through something like parts of speech tagging, right? Like, sure, there is something like vectorization or neural networks or LSTM. All of these things are coming up, but it literally requires you to sort of spend a lot of time investing in I would say technology and ideas which are still very early and which could very quickly get discarded because the next wave came by, right? So the biggest challenge at some level is to sort of from a technology perspective is to understand what level of depth you want to go into things. When do you want to sort of just say, okay, I have this library, I don't fully understand it, but let me think of it as a black box, throw stuff at it, see if it responds, and move forward, or do I really need to sit down and understand this deeply, and what is the level of depth, right? So I think that is sort of one I would say technical challenge that we spent a lot of time on, right, without sort of going into specifics or details. Second thing is also, and this is very specific to sort of I think financial services, but also certain other fields, right, which is um, and sort of let me sort of start by actually talking a little bit about the name of the company, Egregore, right? So Egregore actually means it's basically like a group thought or a collective fiction, right? And so one of the inspirations behind that name is that if you look at sort of the entire financial services space, a significant portion of it is made up behavior, right? Made up rules. It's not gravity, right? Like in the sense that everything ranging from regulations to taxation to law, these are human rules made by humans. And especially when you look at prices, I think what you're going to see is that it is a function of human behavior, right, and not particularly or a representation of the truth in many ways, right? So as they say, in the markets, in the long term are a weighing machine, in the short term are a voting machine, right? So the problem in some ways is that you have, let's say, largely historic data to model the future behavior of the market, but as information keeps coming in, as new tech gets adopted, the model of human behavior and the universe itself is continuously changing, right? So it is actually a very difficult problem to solve. I mean, and I think for a lot it is basically never going to be completely possible to model the way prices work in this market, right? Now, second thing being that in the investment universe, you may have the best model, etc., but what people care about is whether what you are providing is able to create incremental information or value, which can change that decision, right? So that's what we call alpha, right? Now, here again, in the markets that we were sort of trying to build a SaaS product around, the one of the challenges is that if there's a piece of new or interesting information, as long as it's available to one person, it is very valuable, right? The moment it's disseminated to five people, it becomes less valuable per person. And then then sort of at the other end of the curve, when everyone needs to have it in order to sort of survive, then you can again it becomes table stakes and there's a lot of value, right? So we're trying to sell data or insight as a SaaS business, right? Then there's sort of a negative economies of scale right in the beginning, right? So where it's better to at some level take your own capital and trade the market as opposed to try to build a data business, right? So there are all these sort of challenges that came about. I know they're not particularly technical, but we've gone a little bit all over the place, right? But essentially, from a business perspective, I think very unique and differentiated challenges come about if you're trying to build software for this particular part of the puzzle, which is people who are looking to make money by investing or trading or positioning themselves in the capital market. So that's kind of where we started, right? And in some ways, these are all zero sum games, right? Subsequently, I think we had that insight and we moved away from this market to looking at unlocking operational efficiency in middle office, back office, support services, and things of that sort, right? And those are non-zero sum games. I mean, those are basically pure value unlocks. And it became sort of, let's say from purely a technical problem perspective, they were far less exciting. But from a value delivery perspective, I think they sort of were much, much more fulfilling and valuable. And I think that was sort of also our journey. And as we matured as entrepreneurs, I think that was sort of how we moved away from, working on this problem we started with in towards in this direction, right? And there, I think the challenges were a bit different in terms of. I think the biggest thing that we had to work with is that there are again, I think it's a classic problem which all aspects of AI are facing today, which is you may have a cool piece of new technology, it's even delivering value, but you have to really solve for user adoption, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that is sort of where that was a different problem, and we can go into details of that. But that sort of was the biggest challenge when we moved in this direction, right? So again, I've sort of gone all over the place, but yeah, I mean, let me know if you want to sort of pick on any one of these things and unravel the threads a bit deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things is you talked about moving from sort of like a consumer-facing initial set of ideas that you had to more institutional-facing set of products that you wanted to build.
Right.
I think and this usually comes out of insight, and I've seen a lot of other founders in the fintech space. It's sometimes it's very. I think it's more enamoring than anything else. That sometimes your own capital comes into play, especially if you're building a B2C sort of like a business, and you hope that that some of the things that you're building actually and with your own capital at play actually plays out. But the real value in what you're building, and especially around some of the deep tech, around finance or some of the other functions that we spoke about, really lies in institutions, isn't it?
Right.
And institutions, to some extent, may have their own internal teams to sort of like solve some of these problems as well. Sometimes, as an institution grows bigger, that internally it may not be possible, to build or innovate as much earlier, and therefore, that becomes an opportunity of play for companies like this. So, is that how you looked at the problem and said, okay, is this what were the steps that you took or that helped you decide, saying that I'm going to focus on institutions, this is what I'm going to be building on.
Right.
And what are the products that you actually decided were the right things to possibly fit into the institutional space?
Got it. So I think that so again, I think a little bit are not the the normal. We didn't have sort of the we're sort of a little bit of exceptions to the rule there, right? Because both me and my co-founder had spent an extensive amount of time working with large enterprises, right? That meant that we sort of inherently understood the challenges that they face. And in many ways, I think the challenge for us was not that we didn't know how to pitch to them or sell to them. And in our previous avatars, we had spent a lot of time, talking to institutional buyers. So we had exposure to enterprises. So I think that was less of the challenge. Obviously, the harder part for us was really putting something together which met the let's say the criteria or the which passed the smell test of an enterprise and could gain enterprise adoption, right? So that is the real challenge here. And I feel that for many entrepreneurs, the getting the foot in the door with an enterprise should be less of a challenge, right? Because I think access
Yeah.
today is quite easily available, and if you want to have an opening conversation, I don't think that's very hard, right? And it's not sort of a world where, I mean, every large enterprise today has hackathons, has labs, has various initiatives and means to engage with startups. Therefore, I don't think that is ever that is much less of a challenge today. I think the bigger, the harder conversation is really sort of what do you do once you get that foot in the door, and how do you get across the line in the medium to long term and build a sustainable relationship with an enterprise. And I think those challenges are even today sort of not very well discussed or described. So let me sort of make an attempt to sort of walk through some of them, right? I think the first thing really is sort of how do you deliver your product to the enterprise, right? So uh, typically, like, no enterprise is just looking at just your product, right? I mean, they have a problem. They already have, let's say, dozens if not more internal software, various softwares and databases which are already interacting with each other, right? And therefore sort of you are going to be an incremental player in that mix, right? So the first thing really is to understand the state of their technology footprint, and to figure out if you can be in the, I mean, if you're a young startup, like, figure out if you can be in the marketplace of any one of their existing softwares, right? Or find a way where you can natively integrate and operate,
Right.
piggyback on one of those existing things, right? Because that immediately means that you don't have to go through that extra long enterprise sales cycle, which involves not just finding the right buyer, demonstrating value at various levels within the company first, doing various decks and demos and so on, but also lots of questionnaires, cybersecurity reviews, data reviews, lots of other let's say hurdles to cross. And even beyond all that, when you finish all of that, you might still find someone who is in charge of vendor consolidation, right? Enterprises are always in the mood saying that, look, we are dealing with too many vendors, like, can we find a way to reduce the number of touch points? And if the business or the billing that you bring to the table, and especially as a startup, you will basically be quite modest in the way in your first engagement. It really requires a lot of willpower for them to sort of spend time engaging with you and bringing you into their ecosystem, right? And then beyond that, they'll also worry about whether if they develop a dependency on you and you go belly up, where does that leave them? So a lot of these challenges. So my recommendation always is to sort of try and find an existing piece of software and to be able to piggyback on it. But that said, if you sort of do decide to go in direct, then that brings its own set of challenges, which is, but you have a very clear idea of who the buyer is. How is the buyer going to internally look good because of your product? Then figure out who your user is, because your user and your buyer will not be the same person, right? And you need to sort of spend a lot of time thinking about what metrics you will track, how will you ensure that users adopt your product, why should they care, right? So I think that is the second part. And then there might be various other gatekeepers, and what would you want to do in order to sort of navigate that ecosystem, right? And see, you may have a gatekeeper who's an internal player who might say, you know what, why are you spending time on the startup? Give me the budget, I'll build this for you, right? Or there might be someone in the ecosystem, could be a procurement person who has a favorite vendor already, you know, is basically fighting to give them a seat at the table when it comes to this particular mandate and to compete directly with you, right? So a lot of these things to navigate. So beyond sort of, it's not going to be product led growth, right? It's not that you build a great product, it goes viral and people just adopt it. Never happens in the enterprise sort of ecosystem. Is
Space.
always going to be this kind of slow grind, and you will need, you know, mentorship, guidance, a champion in house who's able to tell you the tricks of the trade and help you with the ropes, for you to be able to navigate the ecosystem, right? But that said, I think the good thing about enterprise business is that once you build and you land and you sort of manage to establish a relationship and get your first mandate, very quickly two things are going to happen. The first thing is that typically, because they don't want to keep adding new vendors, they will typically throw new problems at you which are related in other departments. Same problem in a different department, similar problem in the same department. You will get all of these opportunities to sort of expand, right? And enterprises are also very sticky. Typically, they will pay on time. So all of these kind of things, become possible. Very sticky business, dependable, reliable business. Also, logos are incredibly valuable. But that said, takes a significant amount of effort to get across the line. I mean, this is generally like what you would see, right?
That's absolutely. I think you've hit on pretty much every hard spot in the enterprise journey, especially in
Right,
enterprise sales journey. Correct, but it's hard. It's very hard to get in, and even harder to get out after getting in. So I think
right, right,
that's
right,
that's essentially how you would conceptualize. But just shifting gears there a little bit, Hari. There's a sea change, correct? Since Gen AI came into the fore, essentially,
right,
right? It's impacted so many things, especially. I mean, when it comes to products, the way that I look at it is older products, maybe even on the SaaS side, trying to sort of include or move towards AI and AI native products, correct? Which basically, were built straight up, utilizing Gen AI capabilities as well. But, we are probably, I would like to think we're probably a couple of months away from having general AI, come to the fore. If you look at some of the latest mobile phone launches as well, and we're doing this in July 24,
right,
some of these things are even going to be integrated. If you look at WhatsApp for that matter, there is an integration with Llama 3 right now. If you look at Ola, there's an integration with Trim. There is, so you're looking at existing products, showcasing some of the latest innovations as well in this space. But when it comes to finance and financial products, correct? Um, and let's talk about this. What's been your general experience on using LLMs, right, for crunching financial data and coming at an analysis? Has it met your expectations? Because I have my own thoughts on this. I'm not going to
right.
say, I'm not going to sort of, but I want to hear from you,
Sure.
saying, who has built both traditional products as well as looking at,
Right,
so what do you think, Hari?
right. So let me sort of step back and try to think about or provide like a framework for how I think about the space, and then I think we can sort of then take the specific instance of financial
Yeah.
services and go deeper, right? Um, so the first thing being that I think obviously need to completely respect the hype cycle, right? So where everyone in the beginning was like, what is this Gen AI thing? Should I even care about it? And then a couple of, I would say, consumer facing demos happen, and suddenly it feels like magic, right? And what happens is that we over index on the few things that we see which completely wow us, and we think now, and then there's a halo effect, right? And we think that this can do everything now, right? And I think the specific thing that GenAI has triggered, which other previous generation software have not been triggered, is this kind of Turing test sort of breach, right? Which is that anything which can emulate a human being is suddenly interesting to us, right? So if you look at, if I show you like an amazing robot that is able to go and clear landmines, okay, but it looks like a tank, it's not interesting. But if Boston Scientific comes up with a robot that looks like humanoid, right, is doing some jumps and climbing stairs or something, suddenly we're like, wow, right? Because in our heads, not just because it echoes like some Terminator or some other media franchise that we have been fed on, but also anything which is close to human or emulating human behavior is suddenly interesting to us, right? And I think what GenAI has managed to do is it is in that sort of inside the that particular circle on the Venn diagram, right? So it is suddenly garnered a lot of interest. Now, that said, I think the biggest challenge here is there are lots of unknown unknowns, right? In the sense that, uh, you know, every day you can go to various forums on social media and you will find like, posts of the form that look at this, really particular specific anecdotal hard problem, which I, interacted with the LLM and it solved it for me. Or like, here is some really, really easy thing, which, even my 3-year-old can solve. But, look at how stupid this thing is. It's not able to solve it, right? And you can extend that, like, to Kingdom Come. There are so many parts, so many problems or so many challenges or tasks, which either we sort of take such a human benchmark to the problem solving that if something that's hard for humans is being solved very easily by the LLM, and something that's easy for humans is unsolvable by the LLM, we find that as points of interest, right? And this all of this is a completely a false comparison, right? It's happening because for whatever reason that whole chatbot experience or like subsequently the voice interaction experience is fooling us into mapping LLM capabilities or directly to human capabilities and doing that direct one-to-one comparison. Obviously that's also raising questions on whether human jobs will be wiped out and all of these kind of things, right? But I think frankly the way to think about it, and I think this is the right model, and I know Jeff Bezos has not spoken a lot about AI, but one of his interviews he said that this is not an invention, it's a discovery, right? And that's very true, in that it's very much like dynamite or penicillin, where we have sort of found something in the lab, and I mean its behavior is a bit difficult for us to understand and still being fully mapped out, and therefore we have to kind of spend a lot of time researching it before we fully understand its capabilities, right? Now what it cannot do is already reasonably apparent, and a lot of well regarded doyens of the field have called it out, which is incapable of first principles reasoning the way humans do. Is just a next token prediction capability. And while you can say that, hey, what I mean, the counterpoint to that, so the idea here being that uh, given a particular problem, it is not sort of actually sitting down and reasoning through it. All it's doing is generating the next token, right? And pretending to, and that creates this sort of emergent behavior of which make convinces us that there's some reasoning going on. The counterpoint to this is sort of what Ilya talks about, which is if you basically created a novel, a detective novel, where you had all the clues, everything in it, and you fed, and the last letter of the novel on the last page is the name of the killer, right? And you feed everything except that, except the last word to the LLM, and with 100% certainty it generates the name of the killer, right? Then is that not reasoning? Because you don't understand it, but it has used all the data provided to it to come up with that last word, and so in effect it has reasoned and figured out who the killer is, right? Now is that not what reasoning is, right? And now there are various ways to sort of counter that, but this is sort of the ongoing debate, right? But coming back to finance, right now, because of
Before you
the
start that, Hari, I'll just pause you there for a minute,
yeah
correct? And one of the things is, about the reasoning which you talked about is that, I mean, if you think about how a human arrives at a decision, the older you get, you have more data points, correct, on which you will take a decision as well, correct? Your decisions may be at most based on 6 or 7 data points at any given point in time, or even lesser. I'm just generalizing, but
sure
this is what the human brain is capable of doing at any given point in time, correct? But if you take large volumes of data where there are thousands of probabilistic intents that are available on which data can be processed, and to provide the illusion of reasoning, correct? Even if you think of man as a reasoning animal, it's basically, you would think that it's based on the sum total of all the experiences that that person has, correct? And it would be very similar to say an LLM as well. The larger it gets, I mean, the answer to the universe and everything cannot be 42 always, isn't
right
it? But you think about it, but how very different is it? At the end of the day, it is made by humans. So it is made by humans. And, the reasoning is very similar to humans as well, unless, it reaches a capacity where it's able to think of a completely different system, correct? Which we have probably also not thought about. I'm just saying, how difficult is it, to basically, I mean, the larger the model, the more difficult it becomes to control it, correct? So, and the smaller the model, the easier it is because it's got limited information. Is that generalizing too much, or what do you think? Just picking your
yeah
brains on this
so
one.
so
Yeah.
yeah I mean I think the most interesting thoughts and work on this has been done by Francois Chollet, right? And he talks about how to measure intelligence. And I think the most interesting thing in the space of LLMs I've been following over the last couple of days is this ARC AGI price, right? So the idea being that here is a bunch of logic puzzles, and they all sort of involve there's a grid with some squares, and you need to kind of there's some coloring which is happening there, and you need to kind
Hmm.
of do the pattern recognition there. And the idea behind sort of creating this prize and throwing these problems at LLMs is because there isn't a large enough prevailing data set which can on which sort of an LLM could have let's say I mean, so a lot of the traditional benchmarks, right, for LLMs, the challenge that they have is that as you keep training and as you keep sort of trying to optimize for benchmarks. So actually, let's take a step back, right? So today, if I want to, let's say, come up with a new LLM, and I wanted to get an attention, right? It will not get attention unless I publish benchmarks, and there are sort of
Right.
these different benchmarks for LLM capabilities, which have now become sort of broadly accepted. Unless I score higher than prevailing models on those benchmarks, no one is going to really look at my LLM, right? Unless it is a very specific LLM, it's focusing on one very narrow set of tasks, which could be translation, or which could be, let's say, only one domain, like let's say pharma or medicine, or molecular biology, or one of these things. If I put out a general purpose LLM, the expectation is that it will beat prevailing commonly available open source LLMs on those benchmarks. Now that is actually I mean, the reason, because we've fallen into this paradigm, it is very problematic, because what you end up doing with any new LLM is you sort of end up training it to the point where uh, the benchmark data starts leaking into the LLM training set, and therefore what you've got is something that beats all the benchmarks, but practically when people try to start using it, is not really performant, right? And this is a big challenge. I mean, it's true of all kinds of problems where you are sort of where if you keep solving to sort of I forget the specific quote, but essentially um the measure or the metric has become primary rather than building a better LLM, right? So you just want to build an LLM that beats the metrics,
Also,
and
inference and
you're
latency
overfitted.
also play,
Correct. So you're
also come into
overfitting.
all of these things. Yeah.
Correct. You're
Sorry.
overfitting
Go
to
ahead.
those benchmarks,
Yeah.
right? And what the ARC-AGI sort of initiative is trying to do is to come up with a problem which to which sort of LLMs are not exposed in just scrolling the internet or being trained on data sets and things like that. Here's a completely new sort of problem set on which a lot of information is not available, and there isn't enough training data to make the LLM an expert at solving this problem, which means inherently you have to take a different approach. Right now, people have tried to brute force in the sense that they take the existing data set or the problem set, they create lots of examples,
Yeah.
and they try to take the traditional approach to solving this problem. But the hope is that there will be it is sufficient incentive for people to unlock a new way of using LLMs or um, generally available technology and approaches to solve it. So, but I think this is sort of the direction, I think, which is actually quite interesting, because otherwise we are building things which are more of the same, uh, throwing more tokens and building larger neural networks. I don't know if uh, more is just going to be better, right? I think we are sort of
Yeah, that's right.
getting to that point. And I think there are sort of some other interesting ideas here as well, right? Which is, I do expect that transformers itself as the unit of operation, or unit
Mhm.
of construction rather, could change, right? Because we haven't gotten to the point where it's so it's something that everyone understands. There's enough research on it. You can easily sort of pick up and build, right? With transformers, and I think that sort of made that an interesting choice. But it's not at a point where it's a QWERTY keyboard, right? In the sense that if you find a better, let's say, I would say, a unit of I mean, a better thing to sort of build on, then I think we will probably see that shift happening at some point, right? So we've seen that with, I don't know, RNN, CNNs, LSTM. LSTM, I think, is what I've personally spent a lot of time building on top of before transform models came by.
Mhm.
And I think nowadays we hardly talk about them, right? In fact, the if you look at this, right, I mean, in some ways, again, I think I digress, but it takes me back to my engineering days where um, uh, so I passed out of engineering in 2004, and at that time, again, I think there was this passion to work on the latest and greatest and coolest technology, right? And if you remember, this was a period when there were no smartphones, but phones were progressively getting smaller, right?
Correct.
And we were packing more and more and more into that tiny device, and that was the interesting bit, right? So I spent my final year in university working on wireless technology, right? And the idea was, and there were all these ideas, if you remember, GSM was the prevailing sort of technology back then, and then CDMA had come about, right? And I
Right.
think it was Reliance, the other Reliance, which had launched a mobile network and a phone with CDMA. And
Which was, in fact, better technology as well.
yeah,
If you think
no,
about it.
completely,
Yeah. So,
completely. The point here being that uh, fast forward a couple of years, right now, we know these acronyms 3G, 4G, 5G, but there's a small universe of people around the world who are a small subset who actually are working on these technologies, right? The level of abstraction or the layer at which you want to build technology for the mobile phone has become the app store, right?
right.
It's become Android, it's become iOS. It's not, how do I build a better technology at the level of, I mean, the BlackBerry sort of layer of tech is gone, right? That is sort of now monopolized by a few players who are sort of, spending a lot of time getting better at that, whereas everyone else is focused on building at the next layer. Now, if you take sort of the same thing here, there's TSMC, on top of which there's NVIDIA, on top of which there are the foundational model companies, and then there are people building one level on top of that, right? Now, what can happen is that we could see a reshuffle in this as well, just like we saw back. I mean, just like back in the day, uh, the people who are able to extract the largest unit of value were not the folks who are building smaller phones, but the company that was able to create a new layer of experience on top of the phone and unlock massive
Exactly.
adoption.
Yeah.
The same could happen here, right? In the sense that today all the value capture is, or rather valuation capture is happening at the level of LLMs and foundational models. We could see a change where those become, quite, commoditized, and all the value capture is happening at the next level or the level even above that, right? So we
And,
don't
and,
know. I
and,
think
and
that kind of
no, that's a very interesting thought because if you look at some of the latest NVIDIA edge devices, right, these can run some decent LLMs, right?
right,
These can run 7 billion, 8 billion parameter LLMs very easily, correct? And it's not far away that you can typically load. I think if you've got an Apple 15 or a device
exactly.
beyond that, you can easily run an LLM on that, and you don't essentially need anything more than a more. I think that's where we are heading towards as well,
Yeah,
isn't
no,
it? Yeah.
completely right. And to your point, what you were saying earlier, right? Like the app store for LLMs, maybe it's not the custom GPTs on OpenAI, but it's again the app
Yeah.
store, the traditional app store, right? We could very quickly come to that sort of world very, very, very quickly. So yeah, I mean, it is lots changing in the space, and yeah, I mean, remains to be seen how things settle down.
Correct. And with NVIDIA, I think especially with all that technology just leapfrogging, they'll have like 2 or 3 generations in a single year. I've
Right,
seen this happen as well. It is, it's unbelievable how some of the technologies have evolved and how tiny these have become as well. Correct. So that it can technically be deployed even on-prem, and
right,
that has a bearing on enterprises. Has a bearing on how you deploy for and enterprises and back to financial services and things like that. You also know that given your experience that enterprises are a different ball game. It's not necessarily always public cloud that they would prefer.
right.
And this has bearings. There's all sorts of bearings on how we would develop Gen AI. But before you start, I just wanted to also mention, I think it's also down to use cases that you would use for these LLMs as
Correct,
well.
correct.
And on legal, I just wanted to mention here, one of the things is, in our country, India, there are a lot of cases, right, which are pending cases, which
Right, right,
at this
right,
point in time, there are like 50 million plus, right?
right,
And, you have also a set of people who cannot afford legal services as well, right?
right,
And, it's the obligation of the courts to appoint lawyers for that matter to look into some of these cases. But just imagine, a single LLM can be trained, and we have the technology today and the capability today to basically make sure that each of these cases are properly handled. The support also be given to the decadent and things like that, and actually quality support as well. Correct. It's not just somebody that the court thought fit to appoint. So there are lots of use cases which we can typically solve. And and one of the things that also comes up in our country is even today I see an article in the newspaper saying that okay, there's going to be some legislation that puts guardrails. They're looking at it as a technology that will probably take away jobs. It's not being looked at as a technology that can really streamline quite a few things as well. If there's responsibility for all these things. But just as an aside, saying that the technology is available today, you can train it to be a judge on cases, and it is possibly much faster than anything else that could come about as well. For all of these. But that's my thoughts.
right.
That's my thought
Yeah,
on
actually, I
how
mean,
some of these things
I'm
can come.
I'm actually gonna counter you on that, right? I mean,
Okay.
I'll actually let me use that same point, right, to segue into the challenge we face in financial services as well, right? So, typically, when it comes to anything which is any automation, right, what you will see is that LLMs are no exception here unless they can genuinely reason. Um, your performance is only as good as your model choice of model, parameters and features and so on, and your training set, right? Now, what that always means is that um, it's very easy to build a model that is going to work depending on the difficulty in the problem between 60 and 85 or 90% of the time. You can get there very, very quickly. But it is very, very hard from there to progress to something that is successful from a 90 to a 95 to a 95 to a 98, 98 to 99, and then so on, right? So that is the challenge in general with any kind of ML model or any with all of AI, right? Which is that there is always going to be edge cases that slip through the cracks, and especially if you have a bad actor who is hunting for those cases, they will be able to find it, right? So this is true. So if you look at where have we seen very immediate and quick adoption of LLMs? It is in your customer support, in marketing, in writing copy of various sorts, in doing summarizing, probably in replying to emails, in search, right? And even in search, for example, it is a B2C use case, right? The today, like Google's charges, exactly zero for someone to do a Google search, and therefore for them, let's say for search to get disrupted by AI, I mean, because you're not charging anything, I mean, um, you're not going to see. I mean, it is sort of a low touch, high volume use case, right? And all of these will see very quick LLM adoption because the cost of a mistake is not very high. Whereas when you come to legal, accounting, finance, these are all situations where one mistake. I mean, especially in financial services, right? Uh, all the value lies in that one exception and catching that before anyone else, right? And that's when there's a huge opportunity, right? If everyone thinks the same way, then the market prices in fairly, and there is no opportunity for you to make money, for example. All the value and all the wealth lies in those situations where you got something right where everyone has it wrong. Okay. And it's very difficult for let's say any kind of automation or AI or ML sort of situation to be able to catch this on its own, right? um, so that sort of leads immediately to what I would think is that all of these spaces will always be solved in a human plus machine way, right?
I agree.
Many of
We hybrid, but
Yeah,
it's just to digress on that as well. It's not that you will be directly plugging in an LLM output to a use case, especially in these functions, right?
right,
There is a fair amount of orchestration that's involved, even before you, especially in financial services, right?
right,
You cannot simply plug in an OpenAI or a Llama or something else or a
correct.
Mistral, and then expect that it will solve issues, right? So, I mean, there's a fair amount of orchestration, there's a fair amount of prompt engineering, there's a fair amount of error checking on all of these things, right? But, does it get you there 90%? Would you rather have 1 million pending cases or would you have 50 million pending
Oh,
cases?
100%, 100%. Yeah, no,
This
I think the
is,
thing. Yes, correct. I think it
yeah,
becomes a trade-off, and I think the way you will probably get there is that the plaintiff and the defendant, sign a release saying that I'm going to. I know that this is not a perfect process, but it's a quicker process, so I'm going to basically go ahead and allow for this situation to be tried with an AI judge or whatever. I mean, I think there's probably a way to get that going. So completely right. I think the
yeah.
so to yeah, 100%. I think in that way, as I mean, if you put it that way, definitely I think there's value here. The other sort of thing which uh, we've seen a lot in ops, which may also be a way to resolve resolve the problem in the legal universe, is kind of some kind of I would say uh, polling approach, right? So, for example, what is called let's say a six-side check in in um, in financial services or in back office, or what would be essentially involve some kind of a double blind approach to it, where you have the same information presented to two people, and they both evaluate it. They don't know each other's answers, and if their response differs, then a third person is given the same problem to solve, and that person is the tiebreaker, right? So I think there could be approaches like that, where where you have you purposely build two very different sort of approaches to problem solving, or two different, let's say, AIs, to keep things very simple. And if they both align, then that's fine. But then beyond that, their conclusions are presented as a summary to a human, who then gets to resolve, or make the final decision.
No, in fact, that's exactly one of the approaches that we've taken in one of our applications as well.
Okay.
In terms of when you're actually drafting, let's say, a contractual document or any legal document, right? And you want a choice of different clauses, right? Which is based on the context of whatever you're drafting. Our system will actually give you a list of weighted. It'll basically take a weighted average of the three most important things that it thinks are there, and they'll give you a choice, right? So, saying you can choose whatever you want, from any of those things as well. But that's basically emulating the human mind as well, to an extent, right? So you would always want some options, and then you will want to pick and choose. And it's not, and even in the early days of ChatGPT, it used to give you like a couple of options, right?
Right.
So similarly, until the LLM became big enough that it could just ignore all of these things as well. But I think that's an excellent approach as well, to some of these things, where you're giving accurate answers, but you're letting the user sort of like just make a choice and all of these things as well.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, that just to segue from there, right? I'm very curious to get your thoughts on one thing which I have been thinking about in the legal space, right? Which is, if you remember, sort of this whole episode around AlphaGo, right? The sort of the AI which defeated Lee Sedol, and basically became the best Go player in the world. So the way it sort of learned to play Go was essentially, at least the second version of it, they just let the machine play against itself, right? And progressively get better and better and better that way. I've always wondered if, and I don't know if there's a way to correctly present this problem, but I think that there should probably be a way to teach contract negotiation to AIs in this way, right? Where is essentially like it's sort of presenting the two competing, bots, if you will, and they are presenting arguments to each other, and then you kind of iteratively keep, taking the winning bot and making it play against itself until it gets really good, right? And to the point where in the end I have a product where I can say, here is a contract, here are sort of some clauses that I really care about, and here is what I'm willing to give up. You present that narrative to the bot, and then now it runs the negotiation for you.
No,
right?
you can do that today, with some of these, and again, a pitch for myself and our products as well, right?
Right.
You can have playbooks, and you can basically sort of like run a set of tasks where it would sort of figure out what are the differences. Is there a deviation? How would you tackle the deviation and things like this as well? So some of these things could already exist today, but this has been. Have you let if you run a chess program on a Mac or a Windows machine or whatever it is, Mac has one of those things built in, and you let it play by itself, it will, the end result is always a stalemate. It's a draw. And this is exactly what's going to happen if you let two bots, argue it out, because there's no end to it, right? So, and then the human becomes the arbiter at the end of the day.
Got it.
So this is this is typically an approach where where we've experimented with this in our data sciences department as well. It usually always results in a stalemate, okay, and with no side actually coming out on tops, because each of the bots thinks that it has to protect its users' interests, correct? But in a natural negotiation, it's always a give and take, right?
Right.
So the give and take is not necessarily, and you can always program the bot saying that you can give this, you can take this, and conclude things off, correct? But I think the give and take abilities in a contract negotiation are much more critical than legalistic points about.
Sure.
If you just throw, this, you throw a bunch of legalistic points, the other side is just going to walk away, right? So,
Right.
this is exactly what happens. And there are also situations, in the real world where you deal with large enterprises, where it's not necessarily that you have the negotiation or the bargaining skills. They will just like take my paper or leave. This is exactly what's
Sure.
going to happen.
Sure.
So, in both these cases, the bots will not, it may work in consumer contracts, but in business, in reality, at least the way that it's worked now for several thousand years, is there's always some give and take. And it's very unlikely that, you can take very hard positions unless you're a very large business. And,
Right.
it also depends on the discretion of how much you need the contract
Sure.
than anything else, right? So, but we've done this, but there are slightly different approaches that we took after this as well. But I'm happy to show you some of the stuff that we've done so that you can, and it's actually in production. So,
Got it.
yeah. So, but back on this, and it's Hari, we can keep talking on this and all the greatest stuff, right? But back on finance, right? I mean, using LLMs in finance, right? And we talked about some challenges earlier as well. Have you looked into this? Have you thought? I mean, are there better ways, or are there limited ways in which you can use LLMs in finance today?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely. Okay. Let me start with sort of little bit of explaining the state of where things were before LLMs came by, right? So definitely, I think even with the previous generation technology, which would be some form of what we would call AI, but not large language models, we were making a significant amount of progress and being able to unlock various capabilities in various parts of the financial services industry, right? So if you look at, I mean, if I have to sort of break down the challenges in the industry to three or four core problems, right? I think the first sort of, I would say, highly repeatable solved problem uh, for which answers existed even the previous generation was where what I would call some kind of form filling or structured data processing, right? So typical example could be that someone has filled out a tax form, right? The tax form doesn't really change from person to person to person. I mean, sorry, year to year to year, or instance to instance. Probably once in 3 years, let's say, the tax form might change. Someone has filled this out. Now, how do you process that, and how do you sort of automate the subsequent actions to be taken? Now, this level of problem, which is, I would say, processing reasonably semi-structured or highly structured data, I think this has been completely solved. It's now a commodity. There are many players in the market, and there's
You're
lots that's
talking
being
of
done.
RPAs,
I
essentially.
mean,
Yeah.
I would not even call this. We're not even at the level of RPAs, right? We're simply like, if I have a simple API, it is accepting. I tell it that I'm processing a tax form. You send the PDF or the document or whatever. It figures out what tax form this is, gives you the response back, right? This could be tax. Tax is one example. Then we move to things which are, I would say, structured, but where the format is not in your control, right? Which could be, let's say, bank statement processing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bank statements are highly structured. I understand typically what a bank statement should look like, but if, let's say, unknown bank X, how their statement is actually presented, how do they sort of, what is the layout of it? I don't know that, right? And now if I have to extract data from that and do some numerical work on it, then how do I extract the data, right? So this is the next level of problem. And where this gets actually quite complex and difficult is actually in the insurance industry, especially in the US, right? Where everyone needs to have property and casualty insurance. You may typically change your insurance provider once every 2 or 3 years. And what will end up happening is that your new insurer has to quickly process your application, read your entire claim history, which are presented in what are called loss run documents across various past insurers that you've had, who have various formats, understand all of that, and then come back with a quote, right? And it's a time sensitive process because you are it's like going to a policy bazaar or an insurance bazaar type of setup where you said, I'm looking to buy insurance, here is my historic data, hey, all 5 companies, give me a quote. And at the moment you get 3 quotes, you're going to pick the lowest and move forward, right? So you have to be quick. At the same time, you have to be accurate. And there is a winner's curse element involved here. So again, this is the next set of problems, right? Where the data is structured, but you don't know what the format is. And then finally, you come to things which are completely unstructured, right? Which could be, financial statement notes, or let's say legal contracts, or any long form document, like let's say a sustainability report, where you literally don't know. It's in human language. You don't know if the information in here is what is the relevance of it. What do I need to do with it? And there's a lot of what I call stuffing that can happen here, right? So you could, let's say that you have, as a company, put your hand up and said that you will meet certain sustainability targets, right? Obviously there are some core numbers right there, but for example, you could bury all information in like a 300-page sustainability report, and that could basically confuse or hide information, right? So very classic example of this is, let's say you have committed to less than one fatality per 100,000 personnel, or one injury per 100,000 personnel in your factories, okay? But in the fine print, you say you've achieved this goal. In the fine print, you say that this does not include these 14 subsidiaries which we have gotten as a result of acquisition over the last 5 years, where processes are yet being revamped. Okay, this is a small carve out, but practically it means that you've not achieved your goal, right? Now, should you be penalized for that or not is a subjective call. But if someone just threw that 300-page report at the LLM, where some headline number said goal achieved, less than one fatality or one injury per 100,000 people, then it will seem as if that has been achieved, right? So this is now we are entering into territory where Gen AI can actually unlock some value, right? Because traditional approaches are not going to work. But you have to contend with two things here. First thing being that the LLM is only as good as the questions which it has been taught to ask, right? Or the prompts it has been fed, or the framework it has been given to perform an agentic analysis of the document, right? That is definitely sort of the first idea or caveat here.
No, but even before that,
Yeah,
Hari, I think you touched on a very important topic, correct? I'll just pause you there, just hold on to the thought. But
sure.
one of the main things, especially in finance, is to ensure the accuracy of the data. You talked
Right.
of form recognition, you talked of unstructured data and things like this, right? Even today, if you were to sort of look at, if you fed, let's say, a PDF, to an LLM, and which containing financial numbers. I think one of the main things is it may not be able to sort of like even read the table properly, correct, or the numbers in tables and things like that, which is where your recognition really. I think LLM may be capable, but the form recognition libraries are still not up to the mark as well. Even if you
So
use some of the latest stuff which is out there, yeah.
yeah, actually, I'll break that down into two problems, right? What seems like one problem is actually two problems. Okay. The first thing is that you've got this PDF. and you need to do simple, let's say, handwriting recognition or text recognition in it, right? And also understand the structure of information being presented, right? Now, that is one problem. I think it is something that is going to be, it's an open-ended problem. Whatever software or technology you give me, I can always create a PDF that is going to trip it out. Okay. So there is no end to that problem. Someone who wants to really make your life difficult can create a fuzzy looking PDF which is not
Yeah.
easily tractable to that OCR or that recognition, right? The second order problem is, let's say that we have extracted faithfully the contents of the PDF. Uh, the semantic understanding in order to be able to pull out the data that you require, I think that's the next level problem, which I think is firmly in the world of LLMs. I mean, a very simple way of thinking about this would be, um, does your LLM know that an income statement and a profit and loss statement are the same, right? Or a statement of operations and an income statement are the same, right? uh, does it have the semantic understanding to be able to figure this out? That's the next level challenge, right? That lies firmly within the world of LLMs, and that is also the failure to do that, plus the idea that at the end of the day we are still just a next token prediction model, creates vulnerabilities and hallucinations, right? So where you could either be pulling out the wrong data or you could be making up data. I think that those two problems are firmly in the realm of LLMs. And as we get better, as we get better at both prompting, checking, creating a better workflow, we will find that a lot of these challenges get eliminated, right? And obviously, as LLMs get better as well, I think these kind of activities will get better addressed, right? So, for example, there are now foundational models which are smaller models, which have been specifically built to be used for RAG, right? Or like these kind of retrieval augmented generation problems, and I think that will become a special case in itself, right? There are going to be people who just want to interact with an LLM without any retrieval capabilities, and there are going to be people who want to use LLMs solely for retrieval and solely for data processing, and then there is going to be a mix, and we may actually end up with a double barreled approach where we use one LLM for just data capture and processing, and a second one to then sorry data capture and a second one to then process that
Analyze the
and think
data.
about it
Yeah.
and analyze it, right? So I
Yeah.
think all of these
Totally.
ideas will come about. Yeah.
And also, RAG is, the efficiency of RAG can be a lot better. Correct. It is not. I mean, if you use RAG and you've gone through, it's not an issue of the databases that you use. It's more in the question of, I mean, RAG models itself can be improved quite a bit as well. In the sense that if you use RAG today, uh, and if you do not necessarily give the right prompts or are able to sort of like peddle with it, the answers that you get are just nonsensical,
Right.
right? So it is just, there's been a lot of debate on how RAGs are great and things like that, but it's not always. I mean, if you're looking for high precision activities, you need to really amp up the RAG, to be able to
Sure.
make sense. I mean, that's been my experience as well. For something like this, if you get it into production, you will get a lot of negative reviews. So
Right.
I think
Right. Right.
that's
No, no,
that's one of those things,
100%.
right? Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
even here, it is. I feel like it is a space that is quite prone to abstraction or disruption. So if you think about it, right, in the 90s and probably even the early 2000s, like we would all get these assembled computers, right? If you remember, you would never go to a
You
shop
still
and
do.
buy one, right? Yeah, you probably still
Yeah.
do, right? Like where you kind of say, okay, this is the RAM I want, I want, so much SSD, this is the chip, this is, and you kind of put things together, right? And in some ways, like RAG is that, right? But majority of the world doesn't buy computers that way today, right? We just buy something off the shelf, and the combinations have been put together and abstracted away, and they're in neat boxes. and the choice is between, do you want to buy, this Mac or this Mac, or this PC or that PC. And I think we will get to a point where the same thing happens with RAG, right? So where you have a performant, you know, uh, uh, let's say engine or a bot, which works very well for one use case, right? And it's like, that statement, right? Like, we are not going to look under the hood. We are going to take it. It's going to work out of the box, and we will just sort of, pay per use, or license out that particular bot, and maintaining it, keeping it up to date with the latest and greatest of technology as well as domain capabilities, will completely become the onus will be on the provider, right? And I think that's where we will get to, and I'm sure
Yeah,
like Quaco is
totally.
also doing work in this space.
No, the secret amongst Gen AI startups is it all runs on RAG model computers. And since you need assembled computers to be able to really process the models and things like that, are pretty high end servers as well. One of the but if you really want to get things done, you still rely on assembling a PC that you want with the GPU that you want, with
Right.
the CPU that you want, and the boards that you want, and things like that, right? So I think this is where, but you're absolutely right, saying that as things get better, and things and you look at it, it's you're looking forward to more efficient RAG models, if that's the right term to use, right?
Right.
Because RAG even today is, I mean, you can deploy models, but in production, it's a hit or a miss, and that's not a good place to be in,
Sure.
especially if you look at this. But finally, we've covered a lot of ground, Hari, on this. But you've been an entrepreneur, and how would you advise, especially the latest gen of entrepreneurs, especially in the fintech space, correct? Now with the advent of AI, are there any during a conversation you've had a lot of product development insights as well, right? And but is there something more that you'd like to add, Hari, and that'd be really valuable, given your experience of building both the older gen models with the latest gen models as well?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, rather than sort of talking specifically about fintech, let me sort of um, try to share some specific advice for people building in AI in today's day and age, right? I think the most important thing you can do is to pick the right problem. And when I say the right problem, I think, let me sort of qualify that in a few ways, right? So there are many things which were being solved with previous generation technology, and therefore clients, customers, users are familiar with some degree of automation, right? So if Gen AI is able to do an unlock in those spaces, you will find that customer adoption is a bit easier because people are already exposed to automation technology. So that's one idea, right? So are your users willing to accept an automated solution? If they have some exposure to that already, then I think that's definitely helpful. The second thing which you want to think about is, and this is probably more important, and I think we touched upon it earlier as well, is, are you at the right level of abstraction, right? Every time you have ChatGPT or one of these companies come up with a new model, you see these posts saying, here are 100 startups that got killed today by this new release, right? So you really got to have a view on where things are going to be in a couple of years, and make sure that you're at a level of, in the layer of, chips to assembled computers to, fully fleshed out PCs or Macs, or in the world of, where you are sort of working on, either you're working on wireless technology, or you're working on chips, or you're working on building the phone, or you're working on the app store. You've got to figure out where you want to be in that sort of spectrum, right? And obviously closer to the consumer is better, but also, if you pick the right layer or level in your space and in your universe or domain, then the evolution of AI will actually benefit you as opposed to eat you up, right? So being able to sort of sit down and suss that out, and it's not an easy thing to do, right? That will really help you survive and make this evolution or Cambrian explosion of LLM tech that's happening below you lift you up, as opposed to be a wave that drowns you, right? So I think that is very, very important, right? So I think these are some, I would say, things that are nuanced and specific to Gen AI. Then beyond this, I think there is lots of other generic advice, right? I mean, like finding the right co-founder, working on the right problems, figuring out if you want to. I mean, actually having a strong why for, why do you want to start up? Why do you want to work on these problems? And why do you want to do product and not services? So a lot of these sort of fundamental questions you have to have answered for yourself. But I think specific to Gen AI, I think these two are quite important, which is um, a lot of it is actually change management and customer adoption solving, right? Because you may have the greatest product, but if your customers have to spend a lot of time understanding it, you're going to have a problem seeing adoption, right? And at the same time, if you're not at the right level of abstraction, you could become a feature in someone else's product, or one of the foundational models will just wipe you out. So that is something to sort of spend a lot of time thinking about and figuring out. Now, coming back to sort of product development, I would say, like, look, I'm not a traditional PM. Like, I didn't sort of cut my teeth being a PM. I sort of was forced to sort of take on that role because as a founder, I have to be sort of a product manager. Everything that I've learned is from first principles. Here, I would say the most non-intuitive things that I would focus on, which I would say uh, people don't talk enough about, especially in enterprise, is that you really need to know, if you are selling to enterprise, whose lunch are you eating, right? Because the way enterprises work is they have a budget, right? And that budget has to be allocated across whatever software spends that they have. um, you need to really understand where you fit in into their jigsaw puzzle, as opposed to at an abstract level what problem you're solving, right? And I think that is very, very important. You need to figure out, could you be on a marketplace? Do you have to interact with four other softwares? Are there APIs available? How would they think about someone who's building on top of them? All of these things are very important to figure out pretty early in the game. The second thing, I think this is again beyond sort of data privacy, security, and so on. I think there's this classic analogy which someone gave me a long time ago. I keep repeating it, right? Which is like, it is that elephant's teeth or hathi ke dant sort of approach, right? Which is, you need to know what are your product features which look great in a demo and create that wow effect, versus what is it which is a boring aspect of your product but is going to again and again be used every day by your users, and therefore you need to pay a lot of attention to and get it right, because otherwise it's going to be a nuisance for them, and it will affect adoption, right? So have a very clear idea of what is sort of BAU, repeated usage, low uh, uh, low complexity but high volume usage, which you need to like really get right, versus what is like this wow feature which will probably get used like 3 times a year but will be amazing, right? um, so I think being able to break down the two, figuring out what looks great in a demo or in a sales process versus what users will actually end up using a lot. I think these making this kind of differentiation, having a clear idea of what your roadmap will look along both these dimensions, I think that's quite important. Um, Especially in an enterprise world, right, where buyer is not the user. Buyer will want the what you call wow features uh, to kind of be impressed, sell upward, all of those things, and appear for you to appear differentiated. But the user will really use all the BAU, like very mundane things, which but which kind of get used every day, and therefore need to be very perfectly done and need to be focused on. You need to obsess over. Yeah. So I think kind of will leave you with those closing thoughts.
Absolutely. I think you covered such relevant topics as well. Right. One of the other things which, when you were talking, I was just reminiscing is, sometimes even users, right, are not clear how they will use a very specific
Right.
feature. Correct. They're like, I want this because I see something else, like
Yeah.
this elsewhere. I'm like, how many times are you actually going to be using this, which we know in reality is like, nil, right?
Right.
So, but, this is another thing which is coming up, and it's more like tick the box. But in enterprise situations, there are, there are many players, and, this is, and many players to be sort of like, kept happy, keep the ball rolling until it finally comes together. But there's so many other topics, Hari, where you and I could have spent a lot of time on.
Indeed.
And I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of like speak to Code and Counsel today. And I hope to catch up with you soon, and
Yeah.
have show you all the latest stuff that we're building out, get your thoughts on this, and really appreciate your time.
No,
Yes.
completely. And thanks a lot for inviting me over. And this was a really, interesting conversation for me as well. Gave me an opportunity to voice a lot of things that have been going on in my head, but I've probably not like expressed, didn't get the
Yeah.
opportunity to express in this way. So like really appreciate, the invitation as well. And thanks for having me over. Yeah.
No, thanks, Hari. And
All right.
and I'll see you next time in Bangalore as well.
Sounds good.
So, thanks so much. Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care. See you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.